And I guess we just introduce ourselves now. I'm Amanda Marcotte. I'm a journalist for Pandagon, Slate, and RH Reality Check.
Very good. I am Joshua Trevino. I am the Vice President for Communications at the Texas Public Policy Foundation in Austin. And you too are a Texan, Amanda.
I'm sorry?
Have we lost all sound?
I didn't hear you.
Oh, God.
Oh, no, I can hear you now. It just cut for a second.
No. Well, I was just saying I'm in Austin, and you too are a native Texan.
Yeah. I'm a native Texan. I was born in El Paso, Texas. I was raised in El Paso to an extent, and then rural West Texas. And I lived in Austin for the past 15 years. But I live in Brooklyn, New York now. It's the law that journalists have to move here.
Of course. Yeah, right, exactly. Well, it's not a bad place to end up. My feeling on Brooklyn when I lived there many years ago was that it would be just a lovely, lovely place if only it could sort of float away from the rest of the city a bit, and that would render it completely ideal.
It's nice, pretty. It's a nice city, but I like being able to go to Manhattan. So, anyway,
indeed.
We've been grabbed by blogging heads to kind of talk about the campaign and Rick Perry's entrance into it, and sort of his influence on national politics in general. So, which one would you like to start with?
Well, I guess let's talk about the campaign. I suppose it's I was there in Charleston, South Carolina last weekend, actually. So not this past weekend, but 2 Saturdays ago. Which he announced at the Red State Gathering, and I was struck by the enthusiasm that he encountered from the Red State crowd. It was a really interesting.
Rick Perry, you mean?
Yes, right, for Rick Perry, right. Rick Perry's announcement in Charleston. It was a really interesting event, and I have to say that his entry. Combined with the media attention, combined with the polls that we've seen in both Iowa, where he's, I think, got an 11-point lead over Romney, and then in New Hampshire, where he's in a solid second place, is pretty exciting stuff. I think one of the things that it points to was sort of a general perception of a weak GOP field before he entered, which facilitates kind of the late entry. But also, it may speak to some of his electoral strengths too, as well. Obviously, I think his campaign is going to live or die on the Texas job story. And what's your take on that?
Well, having just lived there recently, I think that Texas's job situation is. I mean, I agree. He's going to campaign on that, and it's probably going to be an extremely effective campaign strategy for him. Unfortunately, I think it's a facetious one. Texas's economy is better than the national average, but that's only by barely. It's 8.5% unemployment, if I recall last time, and that's like, a percentage point lower than the national average. I mean, I don't know how significant that is. You still have nearly 1 in 10 Texans out of work that wants to work. Texas has had a booming economy for the past couple of decades, and I think that has sort of protected it from some of the fallout of this sort of national crisis. Plus, Texas has housing laws that have somewhat subdued the foreclosure crisis in the state. So they have housing laws left over from the progressive era that give homeowners a lot of rights that they don't have in other states in the country. So I recall I was working in banking when they started to kind of roll some of that back, and I was concerned about it, but I don't think the rollback was as significant as it was in the rest of the country. So that's kind of my take. The third thing I would say about the Texas economy, besides the fact that it's been growing in like the tech centers, a lot of people have been moving there and it's been growing the economy because of the weather, honestly. There's a lot of immigration that's kind of helps, and there's the drug traffic. That influences the economy significantly in very positive ways. So almost all the drugs that come into the country and go to the east come through Texas, and that's a lot of money being pumped into their economy. And, not being
I'd be very curious to see if anybody has split out the effect of the drug trade on the Texas economy. Of course, the Texas Workforce Commission and I guess the Bureau of Labor Statistics don't have a subcategory for cartel traffic.
Well, it's not that it's creating official jobs that affect the unemployment. It's just that when you have a lot of people with a lot of money from drug traffic spending that money in the state, that does create jobs.
Okay, arguendo. Yeah. All right. My suspicion though is that the BLS stats and again Texas Workforce Commission stats and most of the economic stats that we see are probably broadly accurate. I don't think the drugs trade necessarily has contributed to the growth in, say, the Texas energy sector or the Texas manufacturing sector, for example.
Yeah.
Maybe arguably the services sector, if we want to cut it that way, but I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. I guess I'll argue the contrary point. I think that when you look, so you mentioned the Texas unemployment rate, which you're absolutely right, is about a point, roughly speaking. In fact, they came out with some new numbers last week, about a point below the national average. But I think, and I guess there's maybe 23, maybe 28. I don't remember the exact number, but there's several states, about half the states, that have a lower technical unemployment rate than Texas. But the difference with Texas, I think, is twofold. First, it's not just a story of the unemployment rate per se. It's also a story of net jobs creation. And the simple fact is that when you look at net jobs creation over the past 5 years, so the past half decade, I mean, this is even exceeding the current president, but back into George W. Bush's second term, Texas has had a net job creation that's equal to the other 49 states combined, and that's an incredible number. I would also consider
Well, to be fair, Texas is also the second largest state in the country, so.
Well,
but
it's not just a function of size. I mean, why isn't Illinois overperforming? Why isn't California, the largest state by population, overperforming? I mean, why isn't New York performing in the same way?
I think we can agree that Texas's economy is anomalous in the United States, and it's.
It is. I do agree with you there, but I would argue that it's a very positive anomaly, and it's that reflects well in Texas. And when you look at the number of people moving to Texas, which is averaging roughly 1,000 U.S. citizens a day. Yeah, well, right, and minus one, I suppose. But you're welcome.
I'm sorry. Yeah, even.
Right. Go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's fine. I think Texonomics, which is a very good blog, and anybody watching Blogging Heads ought to go look at it. I guess Political Math has gotten a lot of web traffic lately for its rather extraordinary defense from the left, apparently. A non-Perry fan of the Texas economic achievement, but and that's a great blog. But I would also urge folks to look at the Texonomics site as well. And they actually had a very good post about a month and a half ago, I think it was, trying to figure out, and it's a very difficult thing to tease out, trying to figure out what the Texas unemployment rate would be absent this massive in-migration
those people want jobs too, don't they?
Absolutely, of course.
And aren't people moving to Texas to get jobs? I mean, I get the impression from a lot of people I knew in Austin that moved there, that they came because they had a job.
Yes and no. I actually, I was in California for 5 years, although, like you, I'm a native Texan. Unlike you, I wasn't raised in Texas. I was raised at military bases here and there around the globe. But my family is from here, and so in my long sojourn elsewhere, I was in California from 2005 through last year. And I actually came to Texas. I mean, I'm part of the phenomenon, I suppose. Although, again, I have familial ties, but an economic rationale for moving to Texas was at the forefront of our household decision to uproot from Sacramento and come here.
So here's my question to you. The other thing that I think is probably, in my experience, and I may be wrong, but it seemed to, living in the state, be the case, that a lot of people are moving to Texas also to retire. So they wouldn't count towards those unemployment statistics at all.
I think that's interesting. Of course, I hope so from an economic standpoint, because Lord knows that's fantastic. I think this ties into something that you mentioned earlier, and that people are moving to Texas for the weather. Much as I want to say great things about Texas all the time, Amanda, the weather here is terrible. I mean, it's actually quite bad. I mean, it's
air conditioning, and everyone has air conditioning.
It's a delight from November through March, I think. But of course, right now I think we're on our I forget, like the 35th day of temperatures over 100 degrees. I don't know. I'm sure it's nice and sticky in Brooklyn.
Not to get into the weather discussion, which actually is usually boring, but in this case I think applies. Having lived in Texas my whole life and having now moved to New York, I will definitely say the Texas weather is gorgeous and perfect. And yes, Austin and Houston and San Antonio get really, really hot in the summer, but...
West Texas is a delight, though.
Yeah, West Texas is beautiful. The Panhandle is beautiful. Dallas doesn't get too bad. And the fact of the matter is that as long as you have air conditioning, it's much better. Whereas here in New York, you still have those 3 months of summer that are just miserable, and there's almost no relief from it in the way that there is in Texas. So I would actually take Texas summer over a New York summer.
I feel like I've kind of crossed over into the mirror universe where you're defending Texas and I'm attacking it. So let's
I love Texas. I love Texas. I mean, I lived there for 32 years for a reason.
Yeah, no, it's well, I think all the Blogging Heads viewers can recognize that we both love our state. But that brings up a question I wanted to ask you, and I think that you're really well placed to answer. I was having a discussion, and I guess I shouldn't name the individual, but it's a prominent left of center journalist here in Austin. Having lunch with him last week, and he expressed considerable indignation at what he viewed, and keep in mind, I mean, this fellow, I suspect, although he's a journalist, so he's too professional to tell me, but I'm fairly sure he'll be voting for and wishing devoutly for the president's reelection come November 2012. But he was expressing a great deal of indignation and what I'll term as preemptive outrage at what he thinks is going to be an oncoming national press and especially national left attack on the state of Texas. And specifically what he said is, before this is all over in the next 12 to 14 months, me and my fellow Texans are going to be painted as you name it, ignorant racists, illiterate, uneducated, uncaring, just the whole laundry list of
yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm curious how you see that as a native Texan in New York. I mean, do you think that's coming, or have you seen it already?
Yeah, in the same way that I think a lot of people in the Midwest and flyover state area think of all of the coastal states as they define it by the culture of New York City, or Washington, D.C., culture of just sort of like yuppie-fied, elitist, foodies. But, I think
foodies, of course.
I have a mixed feelings about that because, coming as I do from rural Texas, I want to say that stereotype is fair. It's not the whole state. The thing I want to impress upon people when we start talking about where I'm from here up in New York is that Texas is a really diverse state. Like, it's incredibly diverse. You have everything from the Bible-thumping rednecks who do, unfortunately, still control the politics of the state because of various reasons that we could get into or not. But you also have, these large urban centers that are just as liberal, just as diverse, just as culturally interesting as anything on the coast. And, you also... Texas is a majority state. There's no, the white majority does not, it's not a white majority in the state anymore, I guess is the way I put that. So, it's black, it's Hispanic, it's white. It's basically everything except maybe, now that I've moved to New York, I can definitely say that we don't have as many Italians or Jewish people, so.
Yes. Although in New York, you have I recall the finding good Tex-Mex in New York was a bit of a tough drag back in the day. Yeah. No, sorry.
Still true.
That's very sad. Interesting, and yeah, you're right about that. I mean, I think, and not just from a political standpoint, but the diversity of Texas is something that I think a lot of folks, and I'm going to stereotype, in the elite upper northeastern corridor is something that folks don't necessarily. Quite yet that it is a very, very cosmopolitan and a very internationally oriented state, not just because Mexico is next door. Well, if you talk about Dallas and Houston, which are, I think, two of the top 5 largest cities in America, if I recall correctly.
And San Antonio is now the 7th.
San Antonio is bigger than Dallas if you ignore the DFW metro area. So I mean, San Antonio is an enormous city in its own right, and an almost 80% Hispanic city as well.
Yeah,
I think I think Texas does stand up pretty well. But you raise an interesting question to me, which is that Texas demographics are changing, and they're changing in that we're now arguably, and I think we're at a tipping point, which is why we don't have very terrifically good data. And the census, I think, really only approximates it, because the census, of course, doesn't reach everybody who's maybe illegal or maybe moving around or something like that. But arguably, Texas is has a Hispanic plurality, I suppose, or will soon. And that, I think, is one of the interesting things. And you and I briefly emailed about this interview that went on with the mayor of San Antonio, Julian Castro, over the Financial Times this weekend. And I'm curious. I mean, I have my own thoughts on this, but I'm curious on your thoughts as to how that's going to change Texas, if at all, in the coming decade, really.
Well, I think it kind of depends on a number of factors. I think the Republican Party in the state is surprisingly less concerned about it than they are in other states, because of what it's going to do to their power base in the state. And I don't know why, because Texas, I feel that once you hit that tipping point, and a lot of people are still skeptical, but we could tip into Democratic majority very easily. And the reason that could actually have an impact faster than I think people realize is that Texas has some of the most liberal voting laws in the country. And so you're not going to be having some sort of there's not going to be in some states, they're able to keep minorities from voting in the same numbers that they would otherwise by having these sort of voter ID laws, having voting only on Tuesdays, restricting access to voting booths, all sorts of things. That doesn't really happen as much in Texas. It does to a degree in East Texas, but,
of course, we have a voter ID law now.
I'm sorry?
Of this last legislature, we have a voter ID law.
Ugh. Well, we still have 2 weeks of voting before the election. So I think that matters more than anything. One of the things I miss so much about Texas was you could just vote whenever you wanted to. It made life so easy.
They certainly did inherit and perpetuate this Jeffersonian concept of voting for every possible thing, from librarian down to dog catcher.
Well, and I think the most important thing is that you can vote anywhere in your city for 2 weeks prior to the election. That's something that gives Texas upwards of 70% voter turnout in presidential elections, which is like something like 15 points higher than the national average or something ridiculous like that.
But that doesn't cut across. All groups in Texas, of course. The Hispanic population traditionally does not vote according to its numbers. I mean, it's been a depressed turnout for many different reasons. I think you're right that the rise of Texas Hispanics is on the surface a good thing for Democrats, but I wouldn't say that. Well, I guess two things. First, I wouldn't say that the party identification is necessarily going to hold, and the second thing that I would say is that an increase in Southern Texas Democrats, which is really what we're talking about here, isn't the same thing as an increase in Texas liberalism or Texas progressivism. Because you're talking about a very different stripe of Democrats. There was a very interesting, and I don't know to what extent you followed what's been going on in South Texas politics in the past year. Aaron Pena, who I think is a bellwether in many ways, he's a state representative from Hidalgo County. So we're talking Edinburgh, McAllen area down in the Rio Grande Valley, which is, broadly speaking, where my father's family's from, by the by, so I have a bit of a connection there. But Pena this is before he jumped to the Republican Party in December 2010, he gave a very interesting interview to the Rio Grande Valley Guardian, I believe it was, in which he talked about the increasing disconnect between traditional Democratic power holders he was too politic to say it, but he's really talking about white Democrats in Dallas and Houston versus Hispanic Democrats in San Antonio and Point South. And he said, look, we are, those of us down here in the Valley are religious. We're pro-gun. And he had this laundry list of essentially cultural touchstones that he felt.
There's not much there. To be fair, there's no such thing, I think, as an anti-gun, coalition in Texas of any political significance.
I agree with you on that, but if you're
that,
talking about a national party ID, though, there isn't there that and I think nationally speaking, the NRA has kind of won that fight, but that's still a differentiator, a cultural differentiator that National Democrats have had a difficult time coping with in many ways. I think Bill Clinton was able to do it, but I don't think it's been done well since. But anyway, I mean that's one item in his laundry list, and so what he's talking about is this disconnect. Of course, he jumped to the Republicans, and we'll find out if that was a good move or not in next year's election. But then when you look at things like Solomon Ortiz, who essentially represented Nueces and Cameron counties, Cameron, including Brownsville, right on the border, being defeated by Blake Farenthold, which is a shocker even to me, with the family from Corpus Christi. And then you see Kiko Canseco knocking off Ciro Rodriguez in a border district as well. I really do wonder. I think it's going to lag, but I really do wonder if the rise of the Hispanics is the inevitable demographic triumph for the left that it's being painted as.
You have a really good point, and I think that the Democrats really need to think long and hard about what it's going to take to not see a bunch of jumping over, particularly as I think one of the things that we tend to forget when you're not in the state is that when your state has, like you said, a plurality of Hispanics, you're not talking about the same kind of race-based class systems that you are in some places where you have a white dominating class. So in South Texas, like, everybody's Hispanic. So
yes,
rich people are, poor people are. So, I know a lot of rich people of Mexican heritage who are like just hardcore Republicans. And I think that that's something they need to consider. But the one thing I think that could sort of break the situation is if the Democrats decide to make immigration reform a priority. I think they could recapture the Hispanic vote for a generation at least.
Isn't the president doing that though? I mean, we saw him fly to El Paso, and this is getting a bit outside of Texas, but he flew to El Paso and he made his speech.
We hate it when you call us from outside of Texas. Come on, El Paso's not outside of Texas.
No. Well, the outside of Texas part is I was going to say, and you went to San Juan, Puerto Rico as well.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yes. No. Clearly, we acknowledge El Paso as part of the great state, even though historically they wanted to be part of New Mexico. It happened, but yeah, no. I do think exactly what you're saying. I mean, it looks like that is an emerging presidential strategy is to make that an issue.
But he's going about it the worst way. Like, increasing deportations is just. It sounds great because it's a way to sort of try to get consensus with Republicans on the Hill. But what it does at home is it causes families to break up, it causes stress in communities, and the president gets blamed.
Well, the flip side of that, though, last week was, of course, he announced, I guess there's a review of 300,000 cases, I believe was the number that I saw, in which they're likely going to allow these folks to stay in the U.S.
Okay.
So
That's right.
It does look like there's kind of a bit of a likely deliberate mixed message there. From the presidential part, but of course we're getting far away from Texas at this point.
Yeah.
However, that being said, I'm curious what you think Rick Perry's record has been on this particular issue, on immigration per se, because he's taken fire from left and right.
It's one of those things where I don't particularly have a strong opinion. I think he's more moderate than a lot of Republicans, and I think that's something that is something. It's my opinion that being in a state where you actually have to govern a large immigrant population moderates a lot of Republicans on this issue. He supported a kind of Texas version of the DREAM Act. I think that, and like Bush before him, I think part of the problem is sometimes it seems moderate from Republicans, but what it is that they can't cross the business interests that rely so much on immigrant labor for labor. And it causes them to be a little less like deport everybody kind of attitude. Obviously, Arizona is the exception to this rule, but I think that's because Arizona's labor needs are completely different than Texas or California's.
Well, I won't comment on Arizona, but I think I think there's also a historical reason, and it's been changing a bit. But when you were in West Texas, you were in Alpine, I guess. Is that right? If I'm recalling correctly.
Yeah,
so
yes.
it was.
But none of my family lives there anymore.
Oh, okay.
They still live in West Texas, but not Alpine.
Big Bend country, either way,
yeah.
and so definitely. I mean, I would certainly include that as a border area. I mean, I recall when we would visit family that movement across the border really until the past 10, 15 years, really the past 10 years was fairly free and easy. And when you look at a lot of family histories, ending up on the Texas or the Mexican side was almost as much a matter of luck as it was by design, depending on where you got your job, where you ended up getting married, where you ended up having your family. And so
it's still somewhat that way. It's just people are living in more fear than they used to about that.
Well, I actually don't necessarily agree with that. I think there's two things that are changing that in a lot of different ways. I think obviously the violence in Mexico has had a tremendous effect on movement.
When you're in El Paso, you don't go over there anymore.
No, you definitely don't.
But it's also increased immigration to El Paso from Juarez.
Yes, it has. Absolutely true. And it's the same all the way across the border. I had last month actually. I had breakfast in Matamoros. I was in McAllen for work and went and had a breakfast with a journalist in Matamoros. And I have to tell you, Amanda, it was the most uncomfortable and tense 90 minutes I've ever spent in a foreign country. I mean, it was actually quite an alarming experience just to be there and see the level of fear and kind of lockdown that folks were on there. So that's happening, and that's obviously kind of native to the Mexican side. But on the American side, the border controls are tight to an extent that they haven't been historically in the past. I mean, this idea that you would actually have to have a passport to cross over and spend an afternoon shopping in Progreso, for example, or
even permission.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
When I was a kid, a lot of places you could just walk across and nobody ever checked.
That's exactly
look
right.
at you.
Yeah. Or you show your driver's license, or your parents vouch for you, or something. I mean, it was.
Yeah, but you may not even talk to somebody. Like we would actually just walk across the river when I was a teenager.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And but imagine that now. I mean, it seems like a million years ago, and it's It just seems, whatever the causes are, it seems a pity to have that cultural exchange decline for the reasons that it has. So, all that said, I've asked you a ton of questions. What questions do you have for me?
Well, I mean, so you've come back in just the past couple of years, right?
Exactly 1 year ago this month, actually. Yeah.
So what do you think what do you think is Rick Perry's reputation? I mean, you're in Austin, so I mean, it's not good there.
Yeah,
but
well,
I mean, you clearly travel around the state. So how do you feel people are feeling about Rick Perry? Because my feeling there was that he was kind of like not popular. He was just sort of like, meh, the Republican that we got. You know?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think how to put this. I'll start by saying that I don't think anybody in Austin, including people on the left, believe that Austin is representative at all of the rest of the state in any meaningful way.
No.
So, which actually is a point of pride, I think, for a lot of the residents here. When I will say this, when on the election issue, on the general perception issue, I think that my perception is when I travel around Texas, and most of where I go is to South Texas, and then to Dallas and Houston quite a bit. As you know, unanimity and general feeling in Texas politics is a very, very rare thing. Texas, I think Texas, you can argue this, I'm not sure to what extent this is true, but I have had people, and I've seen people argue, informed people argue that Texas now is entering a period of essentially one-party Republican rule in the same way that it was one-party Democratic rule for most of the post-Reconstruction period. Yeah, and I'm not entirely convinced that's true. I mean, I actually think that the Texas Democrats will likely have some sort of success someday in our lifetimes statewide. But be that as it may, even if that is true, even if we are entering a period of one-party dominance, all that means is that the debates and the divisions and the conflicts and the rivalries just migrate internal to the dominant party, and that's always been the case, whether it's in Texas or out of Texas. how this pertains to Rick Perry, I think obviously if you watched the re-election campaign in 2010, I mean you basically saw the entirety between Deborah Medina on the right to Kay Bailey Hutchinson, the center right to Bill White on the left. I mean that was the entire anti-Perry spectrum, and it was sizable. So there's no denying that he's has opposition in state. But at the same time, I think that the extent to which that opposition matters is really a function of whether attacks on the governor, especially now that we're talking about a national stage, are also construed as attacks on Texas. And of course, this is something we just finished talking about like 20 minutes ago. I do think that if the criticism becomes a criticism of Texas as such and running down Texas as such, you are going to find a lot of Texans who may or may not be special fans of Governor Perry, but they are going to rally to the defense of their state. And I think that's going to cut across even ideological lines that people may not fully understand outside of the state. So
would you say that from the opposition's perspective, the best way, if Perry was to win the nomination, because I don't think it matters until he does, but obviously from the Democratic point of view, do you think that the best way to mount an attack on Perry would be to admit that Texas's economy is good and praise the state to the hilt while attacking him personally?
I don't know. I don't know how that needle gets threaded. In all frankness, I think the strategy that we see may be the one that is arrived at, where in a lot of corners you see this, and certainly the sorry to demonize your adopted city, but the pages of the New York Times I think are definitely leading the way on this. You saw Krugman attacking the Texas job record, which I don't think got a ton of traction outside of the people who are already predisposed to listen to Krugman. But I do think that what does get traction, and I think what the strategy ends up being, is what I'll describe as a cultural attack on Rick Perry and on Texans in general. And I don't see how that gets separated out from perceived cultural condescension to other parts of the country. The Texas job record is what it is, and there will be political chipping away at it. But I'm not entirely sure how, and maybe there is an answer for this, and this is why I'm not a Democratic strategist, because I have no idea how this is done. I don't see how you mount an attack on a Texan per se as alien or unacceptable or uneducated or any of these other things. I don't see how you do that without running the risk of alienating people in states that you need, like rural Ohio or Indiana, or even to a certain extent the upper Midwest. I mean, I've seen far smarter people than myself, gin out the electoral map, and it really looks like that the 2012 race comes down to really a handful of states. I mean, you're talking about Ohio, you're talking about Florida, and you're talking about maybe Wisconsin and Minnesota. And these are states where you've got, I think, a meaningful number of people who look at a guy from Texas who shoots coyotes and likes the outdoors and owns guns, and they kind of identify with that. I mean, that's kind of what they want for themselves. And so I think it presents. I do think the election will be close, but I think it presents a very difficult challenge, and I think it presents a challenge that a guy like, for example, Mitt Romney doesn't. I think that's a much more straightforward contest.
Same. I think that the Democratic coalition is actually quite aware that they shouldn't go there, because I think I see a little bit of that. But I recall when George Bush was president, the attacks on him and his Texanness were actually accusations from the left, were accusations that he wasn't as Texan as he made himself out to be. Which was kind of an affirmation of Texanness as a culture. I saw a lot of people say things like, that's not a real ranch, and he's afraid of horses, which is true, but and is comical. I argued with people the ranch point, but I think that's kind of going off. But the thing is, I didn't see, he was born in Connecticut. That accent is a put upon. I saw these accusations being flung at him, but all of them were subtly affirming that being a gun-shooting, horse-riding, beer-drinking, drawlin, yawlin Texan is a good thing, at least divorced from cultural conservatism, which and you live in Austin, so you can see that it completely is, that one can be a drawlin, yawlin, left of Karl Marx Texan. There are many.
Yeah. But don't you think
now
that's
that we don't have
mind-blowing
Polyionos around anymore, it's kind of, the voice to speak out for that is a little bit lost on the national stage, but I don't think people have forgotten that.
I think, though, this may be a case, and I mean this as a compliment, where you're a bit more cosmopolitan than maybe a lot of your fellow, I don't know if I call them your fellow Northeasterners, or the people that you live near now. I guess my experience and my perception is that they find everything that you just said kind of boggling. I don't think that a lot of folks
do, but I think they know better than to just attack it for itself. I think they might find it boggling, but they also find it exotic and kind of a good way. Like the food's good. Country western is good.
And this is a job for me.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that there's. I don't see the cultural hostility from the urban coastal elite towards just the sort of depoliticized signifiers of Texan culture that I see going a lot of times the other way. When I was living in Texas, I saw a lot more of people that were to the right that were just angry and hostile at organic food or baby slings or whatever. I don't even pay attention to.
Oh, okay.
Anything that was sort of a marker of kind of yuppified coastal culture. I see a lot more ugliness towards that in Texas than I see ugliness towards depoliticized irrelevant markers of culture in Texas. So, maybe it's just that people are nice to me because they know that I'm a Texan. But I've heard nothing but praise of just the culture of Texas as a culture, and all the things that are marvelous about it. Now, Rick Perry as a person is a little bit alarming because he doesn't separate, he's not only aggressively Texan, but he's kind of an aggressive redneck, and I think that's going to cross a lot of people's boundaries. But there's sort of a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any denying that there's an aesthetic element that goes into the estimation of any candidate, and certainly somebody who is as strongly regionally identified as Rick Perry is gonna encounter that. I mean, he is without question a man from Paint Creek, Texas, and he's taken that with him all the way up to the to the governor's mansion, and I guess the governor's
he's just Aggied.
He's very Aggie, yeah. He's really, really Aggie. I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because when I haven't seen a single journalist note this. I've seen several.
They don't understand Texas A&M. They just don't.
No, well, I mean, who does really? But when he began his speech with Howdy in Charleston, I thought, of course, you begin with the Aggie greeting, right? And absolutely nobody caught it. I mean, just completely went over their head. Or if they mentioned it, they thought it. Well, this is just how people in Texas talk.
No, they don't.
Yeah,
people don't say howdy.
Right. Well, I mean, they do, but you got to be out in like Alice, Texas, or something like that to
and then often it's with a wink.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's really interesting. I do think though, and I think this is just inevitable how it's going to be. And we can mark this down as a prediction and see whether or not it's true as time goes on. I do think that exactly the things that you say aren't happening much now in terms of just kind of the naked hostility. If the governor wins the nomination and if the election looks like it's going to be close, or if he's winning, I do think that stuff is going to come out. I really do think that's going to, just as a kind of an organic reaction to whatever fear or alarm is felt at the course of the election, and that does concern me quite a bit.
So I have one more thing I kind of want to toss out to you
Sure.
and get your opinion on. So I think one of the interesting things that has not gotten the traction that it deserves, because every time I bring this up in social circles, people just jaw drop, eyes boggle. They're like, really? Is, Perry's history as a campaign manager for Al Gore in Texas in 1988. I don't. Why do you think that's going to become a big deal? I suppose, since flip-flopping is considered just some grievous sin in American politics, I mean, going from Al Gore's campaign manager,
Sure.
Al,
Statewide
global
chair.
warming Gore,
Yeah.
to Rick Perry, who's not only trying. Rick Perry is not trying to get the subdued businessman Republican vote. He's trying to get the Bible thumping, global warming denying, Tea Party vote, and he's hoping to coast that to the nomination. I think that's really obvious. I have to wonder if the Al Gore thing is just going to kill him. I just don't see how he gets around that. I really wish that the opposition would just make a bigger deal out of that. I mean, Romney certainly should.
Well, there's a long list of things Romney should do. I think, honestly, I just don't think it matters that much, and I'll tell you why. Two reasons. First of all, I mean, Al Gore was a very different politician in 1988.
Yeah, but people don't think in those terms.
Well,
I just don't think that they do.
yeah, no, well, okay, that's true. I agree with you. But then the second reason is that I don't think it matters is that Southern politics in general. And I don't even think it's Southern politics. I think American politics at large is just absolutely strewn with figures who jumped parties at this point. I mean, when you look at what happened from the mid '80s through 2000, really, I mean, this great ideological sort of the parties. You and I can both probably name a dozen people off the top of our head who switched parties at some point in their career. I don't see a lot of evidence. I guess I can think of a couple of outliers, but on the whole, I don't see a lot of evidence that voters punish partisan switching so much as they punish ideological switching. The flip-flop charge traditionally, I think, is effective, and I think history bears this out. It's effective when you've changed actual substantive positions. When you change party labels in the name of keeping your substantive positions, I mean, look at Ronald Reagan's line about the Democratic Party leaving him. He wasn't punished for that. I mean, he was amply rewarded. And
I think the convert tales are a huge part of Republican lore.
Yeah.
But Perry isn't telling a conversion tale. He's just issuing blanket
he's
denial.
not because he's not. I'm not going to speak for the campaign in this case, but I don't think that.
I mean, he's not denying that he worked for Gore. He's just issuing blanket denials about what Gore's stances were in 1988. And he's saying things that are frankly untrue. Like, he's claiming that Gore didn't. The global warming thing wasn't a big deal in '88, and that's like super false. Like, Gore had been having hearings about it for at least a decade by that point. It was the number one campaign issue.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
was it a number one campaign issue for him in '88? I don't think so.
I think so. Yeah, it was on this priority list. The LA Times did a story about his announcement, saying that he at the time. He was basically the number one global warming guy on the Hill.
I think though, and I don't want to get too deep into defending this or that stance from a tactical standpoint. But so I'll just say this: regardless of the specifics of what Al Gore was proposing in '88 during the course of his campaign, I don't think it's that remarkable that Southern Democrats would support Southern Democrats in that day and age, especially given that back then Al Gore was identified as such, and there were things that Al Gore played up in his biography, particularly his Vietnam service, which is quite admirable in my opinion, that he didn't play up in later campaigns. So I would argue that it's a bit of a mistake to view Al Gore '88 through the lens of Al Gore 2011. To get back to your question, though, I mean, do I think it'll become an issue? Yeah, people will raise it. I just really don't see it having a ton of traction. I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, I still think that Romney should make a fuss over it because he could at least say, "I've always been a Republican," which with the Massachusetts situation, he probably needs to do something of that nature. He
does face a series of unique challenges. I mean, I think I guess since we're nearing the end of our allotted time, I will close with this thought, and I'll be curious what your reaction to this is. If you look at the coalition that's necessary to win not just a Republican nomination, but the presidency as a whole. You're really talking about people who are concerned about economic issues and people who are concerned about social issues. And I think one of the things that may commend a Perry campaign is this ability to bridge that divide. I don't know that. That there are other candidates who can do it, but I wonder if they're as well placed as he is.
I agree. I think I think it's a facetious argument, but I think it's one that will have a lot of traction in an election. The notion that Texas's economy is better than the rest of the nation, which I think is true, but Perry taking credit for that, which I don't think he deserves, I think economics will determine the election. So, and I think the Obama administration would be wise to see that coming and make some drastic moves between now and November 2012 that indicate that they're more trustworthy on jobs than Perry is. I don't.
Do we know? I said, well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but what would those moves be? I mean, I guess I'm asking you from the side of, I assume, an Obama partisan. What can you do at this point? I mean, there's just not a ton of time.
They need to rush job creation. I think they've just been dragging their feet on it, and I think there's a lot of it's mostly a bureaucratic problem at this point, and. What's interesting to me is that as an executive, that's actually something he has a lot of control over. He can rush certain things. He can create jobs in depressed areas and get, if he was, the most strategic thing to do, I think, would be just to target swing districts and just pour money into them. I mean, and create jobs and just give people stuff to do. And then, they will thank you, and they will thank you with their votes. And, there's a moral argument against doing it that way, but that would probably be the smartest political.
It's a very Chicago strategy, isn't it?
I don't know about that. What they should do is just create jobs everywhere, but it wouldn't hurt to target the swing districts first. But I think it's going to be incredibly hard for the Obama administration to fight Perry saying, I have lower unemployment in Texas, because every rebuttal to that is so nuanced and based in kind of like looking at economic structures. And unfortunately, in our current political system, people just kind of look at the guy at the top and give him credit for whatever's going on, regardless of whether it's his fault or not.
Credit or blame.
Yeah, credit or blame. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether he did it or if he just was lucky. And I think Perry kind of walked into a state that's booming for really complicated reasons.
Well, can I assume that we can at least close on the common ground of don't mess with Texas?
Yes.
Very good.
Texas. Texas forever.
Indeed. Well, come back anytime, and but in the meantime, say hi to Brooklyn for me. And
will do.
Thanks for
say hi to Austin for me.
Absolutely, and thank you for a lovely conversation.
Thank you.
All right.